the sky over Tel Aviv went dark. Not from clouds. People stopped walking. Drivers slowed down. Someone reached for their phone without quite knowing why, because the hand just moved on its own to capture what the eyes were seeing. Because something was wrong. Not dangerous, not frightening in the usual sense, just wrong. The sky that should have been blue or gray had turned black and alive. Moving. Loud. Thousands of birds. They circled above the Azrieli Towers, those three glass giants that have become the symbol of modern Tel Aviv, the symbol of everything Israel built on this land against all odds. Circle after circle, wave after wave, descending and rising, blocking the sun, casting a moving shadow across the streets below. People looked up and couldn't explain to themselves why this made them cold inside. Birds. Just birds. But something about it was deeply wrong. The video spread across the internet within hours. By evening, millions had watched it. The comments split into exactly two camps, and that itself is telling. Some wrote, "Migration, springtime, nothing unusual, calm down." Others wrote one word, "apocalypse." Ornithologists rushed in for comment, explained everything quickly and clearly. Israel is one of the most important migration corridors on the planet. Every spring and autumn, between 500 million and 1 billion birds pass through this narrow strip of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the desert. Ravens, storks, eagles, hawks, all of this is normal here. Nothing to see. Science had its say. And yet there was one small piece of context that science somehow forgot to mention. On that very Tuesday, when the birds were circling over Tel Aviv, a war was being fought less than 200 miles to the east. Not a metaphorical war, not tensions or escalation. A real war, with strikes, with fire, with the dead. Israel and the United States against Iran. A region that has been the gravitational center of prophecy for thousands of years was burning again. And above the city where people wake up every morning to the sound of air raid sirens. Above that city, thousands of black birds were circling. Coincidence? Of course, coincidence. Everything is always a coincidence until it isn't. Because there is a text, an old text, a very old text, written at a time when these glass towers were desert, and the very word Israel described a people in exile, a people without land, a people that most empires of that era believed had vanished from the face of the earth forever. That text describes exactly what people saw on Tuesday. Not approximately, not open to interpretation. Exactly this. Birds gathering in the sky above the land of Israel. Gathering on command. Gathering because soon there would be something to feed on. But before we open that text, one detail that most people don't know. Ravens don't just randomly trigger this primal fear in us. This is not superstition and not folklore. This is observation accumulated over thousands of years. Ravens are among the very few animals on the planet that deliberately follow armies, follow troops on the march, follow battles. This is documented in sources from antiquity through the 20th century. Before the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, eyewitnesses described enormous flocks of ravens above the English and French positions, a full day before the slaughter began. At Borodino in 1812, French officers wrote in their diaries that the birds had begun to gather even as the army was still approaching the field. Ravens sense death, or whatever precedes it. They know something we don't. And here they are over Tel Aviv. Now, the text, the book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, written in the 1st century AD by the Apostle John on the island of Patmos, in exile, in solitude, in a state the author himself describes as in the Spirit. Chapter 19, a scene that theologians call one of the most terrifying in all of Scripture, and the competition there is fierce. An angel, he is standing on the sun, not near the sun, on the sun, and he cries out, with a loud voice. But he is not crying out to people, he is crying out to birds. To every bird flying in mid-heaven, come, gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals, and the mighty, of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, great and small. Stop for a moment. Read that slowly. An angel is summoning birds to a feast of flesh, the flesh of everyone, kings and slaves, the mighty and the small. After this battle, no one will be left standing, and the birds will have something to feed on. This is Armageddon, the appearance of the rider on the white horse, whom John describes as Christ returning with a heavenly army. The final battle, the end of history as we know it. And the birds, they are part of this picture. They are summoned in advance, because they are needed, because their role in this scenario is already written. But this text has a source, an even older one, the prophet Ezekiel, the 6th century BC, chapter 39. When John wrote his revelation, he was reading Ezekiel. This is obvious to any scholar, because the scene is identical, word for word, image for image. The Lord speaks to birds and beasts, say to every kind of bird and all the wild animals, gather together and come. Assemble from all around to the sacrifice I am preparing for you. You will eat the flesh of mighty men and drink the blood of the princes of the earth. At my table you will eat your fill of horses and riders, mighty men and all kinds of warriors. Ezekiel wrote this 600 years before John. John repeated it 600 years later. Two prophets from different eras, describing the same picture. Birds over the field of the last battle on the land of Israel. And now, the most important part. The part that makes you genuinely uneasy. That same chapter 38 of Ezekiel, the chapter that comes directly before the scene with the birds and sets its context, contains a list of nations. Nations that, according to the prophet, will gather against Israel in the last days. A coalition led by someone called Gog from the land of Magog. The prophet names the allies of this coalition one by one, and among them, one name that is impossible to miss. Persia. The country the entire world today calls Iran. Ezekiel wrote this in the 6th century BC. 2,600 years have passed. And today, the country he called Persia is at war with Israel. Right now, on the very days when ravens circle over Tel Aviv. You can say, coincidence. Iran has always been near Israel, always been its enemy. This isn't prophecy, it's geography. You can say that. But look at the full list of nations in chapter 38. And you'll find what modern scholars identify as Turkey, Libya, Ethiopia, peoples from the far north. The region. Exactly the region that is on fire right now. The birds are circling. The text was written 2,600 years ago. And in it, these birds. And this enemy from the east. And this land. But this is only the first layer. Because the story of animal omens has a continuation. And it didn't happen in the air, it happened on the ground. In Jerusalem. At the holiest place in the world. That, in the next part. Jerusalem, the old city, the Western Wall. If you want to understand what is happening in the Middle East, not politically, not militarily, but in that deeper, prophetic sense that doesn't fit into news bulletins, come here. To these stones. To this wall of limestone, nearly 2,000 years old, that has seen Roman legions, Crusaders, Ottomans, British soldiers, Israeli paratroopers in 67, that stands while everything around it collapses and rebuilds itself. Here, at this wall, something strange happened a few months ago. In the early morning hours, before dawn, when the plaza in front of the wall is nearly empty, foxes appeared. Not one, not two, a group. They emerged from the darkness, walked along the base of the wall, stopped, looked around, with that calm, almost contemptuous gaze that belongs only to animals that know no fear. Someone among the rare night visitors filmed it on their phone. The video reached the internet, and those who knew what to look for understood immediately what they were seeing. Because foxes at the Western Wall are not just foxes. This is a prophecy, specific, written down, ancient, the Book of Lamentations. Chapter 5, verse 18. Jeremiah mourns the destroyed Jerusalem, the destroyed temple, the destroyed world. And in this mourning, one line that reads almost like a news report. Because of Mount Zion, which lies desolate, with foxes prowling over it. Foxes on the sacred mountain. Foxes where the temple once stood. This is an image of absolute desolation, when the place where sacrifices were once offered, where the choir of Levites once sang, where kings once bowed before God. That place has become so empty that wild animals walk through it like an abandoned lot. Jeremiah wrote this as a statement of fact. This is what has become of us. This is how far we have fallen. But the Talmud transformed this image into something far greater. Tractate Makkot, page 24. A story that every religious Jew knows. For great rabbis were ascending to Jerusalem after the destruction of the Second Temple. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Joshua, and Rabbi Akiva. They reached the Temple Mount, the place where the temple once stood, where the Holy of Holies had been, the most sacred place in the world. And they saw a fox. The fox emerged from the very place where only the high priest could enter, and only once a year, and only after special purification, on pain of death, the place where the divine presence itself had dwelled. And the rabbis wept, all of them, except one. Rabbi Akiva laughed. They asked him, "How can you laugh? Look at what has become of the sanctuary." And he answered them, "That is exactly why I am laughing. Because the prophecy of destruction has been fulfilled, foxes walk upon Mount Zion." And that means the second prophecy will also be fulfilled, the prophecy of the prophet Zechariah about restoration, that the elderly will again sit peacefully in the streets of Jerusalem, and children will again play in its squares. One is impossible without the other. They are bound together. You cannot receive one without receiving the other. The foxes at the wall are a seal on a promise. The destruction came. Therefore, the restoration is inevitable. The rabbi of the Western Wall, Shmuel Rabinowitz, when shown photographs of the foxes, could not hold back his tears. He said exactly this: "One cannot refrain from crying at the sight of the fulfillment of the prophecy. Foxes walk upon it." But wait, we haven't reached the main point yet. Because the foxes at the wall are one sign, the ravens over Tel Aviv are another. Two signs, from the earth and from the sky, at the same time, in the same place. In the days when Persia, Iran, is striking at Israel's allies, and the sky above the region is being cut by missiles and drones. Two signs within months of each other, both from the same sacred texts. Texts written when no one could have imagined that the state of Israel would ever exist again. That Persia would once again be the enemy. That ravens would once again circle over this land. The coincidences are multiplying. Let's count them together. Ezekiel names Persia in the list of Israel's enemies in the last days. 1. Ezekiel describes birds gathering for a feast over the field of the final battle on the land of Israel. 2. John in Revelation repeats the same scene word for word. 3. Foxes at the Western Wall, written about by Jeremiah. 4. Thousands of ravens over Tel Aviv in the days of war with Iran. 5. 5 points, and every one of them points in the same direction. But this is still not the end of the list, because these prophecies are biblical, and there are others, completely different sources, different traditions, different eras, different languages, and they say the same thing. A blind woman from Bulgaria, a French astrologer from the 16th century, Hadith of the Prophet, recorded 14 centuries ago. They did not read each other. They could not have coordinated. They lived in different worlds, spoke different languages, prayed to different gods. And every one of them saw the same thing. What exactly? In the next part. Let's start with the woman who saw nothing and saw everything. Bulgaria, 1989. Vanga, a blind clairvoyant whose waiting list included presidents and intelligence officers, ordinary people and scientists, believers and atheists, spoke a phrase that no one understood at the time. It was written down, filed away, and only years later, pulled out and reread with blood running cold. Fear, fear. The American brothers will fall, attacked by the iron birds. The wolves will howl from the bushes, and innocent blood will flow like a river. Iron birds. American brothers. September 11th, 2001. Two planes slam into towers in New York. Towers that were called twins. Brothers. And the iron birds were exactly what the planes were in the hands of the hijackers. Not a word about planes. Not a word about America directly. But everything. Exactly about this. Remember this image. Birds in Vanga's prophecies are instruments of catastrophe. Birds in Vanga always mean death, a strike, something falling from the sky onto people. But that was 1989. What did she say about our time? According to available sources, shortly before her death in 1996, Vanga left a prophecy that was kept almost secret for 30 years. About a threshold she called the end of the old world order. And this is what she said about the time when everything would converge in one point. The earth will freeze. The wind will die. The birds will go silent. and people will be afraid to breathe. The birds will go silent. Not fly away, go silent. That is an important distinction. The silence of birds is not migration. It is premonition. Animals sense what people have not yet grasped. Before an earthquake, dogs go quiet. Before a tsunami, elephants move inland. Before something enormous, birds fall silent. Above Tel Aviv, they were not silent. They were screaming. Now, a man from the 16th century, Michel de Nostradamus, a French physician, astrologer, and seer summoned during his lifetime by the Queen of France herself, and who died having predicted the exact day of his own death. His quatrains are encrypted four-line verses, deliberately written in a mixture of four languages, deliberately vague, deliberately stripped of dates. He explained this himself in a letter to his son. If written too clearly, the authorities would destroy the book. So fog. So allegory. In recent months, against the backdrop of the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran, interpreters of his text have spoken of two quatrains with particular urgency. The first, Quatrain I, 26. A great swarm of bees will arise, a night ambush. At first glance, what do bees have to do with this? What does this have to do with our time? But look at what a night kamikaze drone attack actually looks like. Hundreds of small, buzzing machines flying through darkness in a swarm. Sound, movement, impact. This is exactly what is happening over the Middle East right now. Iranian and Israeli-American drones striking targets at night. A swarm. Bees. A night ambush. Nostradamus wrote this in 1555, when the word drone did not exist in any language on Earth. The second quatrain is being linked directly to this year, when Mars will rule among the stars. Human blood will water the sanctuary. 3 fires will rise from the eastern side, while the western side falls into silence and goes dark. Mars, the ancient god of war, 3 fires from the east, strikes on Iranian targets, retaliatory strikes on Gulf monarchies, the expanding front. The western side in silence and darkness. Europe, paralyzed by fear of what comes next. People will say, this is too vague. You can apply it to any conflict in any era. You can. But look at the timeline. Every time the world enters another major crisis, Nostradamus researchers pull out his texts and find exactly that crisis inside them. Not something similar. Exactly that. Iran, the East, fire, birds and swarms in the night. But if Vanga and Nostradamus are not enough, there is a third source, the oldest of all we will examine today, and the most specific, Islam. 14 centuries ago, the Prophet Muhammad described what would happen at the end of time. These descriptions are recorded in Hadith, and among them is one that, in the context of everything we are discussing today, reads like a chronicle of events unfolding right now. Malhama al-Kubra, the Great Battle, the Islamic equivalent of Armageddon. The Hadith describe it with unnerving precision, the place, the participants, the sequence of events. And within this description, there is a detail that takes your breath away. After Malhama al-Kubra, after this last great battle, the earth will be covered with the bodies of fallen enemies. The smell of death will spread across the entire land. And then, say the Hadith, Allah will send birds, enormous birds. They will seize the bodies and carry them away wherever Allah wills. Birds, again birds. In the Islamic tradition, the exact same scene as in Ezekiel, the same as in the Revelation of John. Birds over the field of the last battle. Birds as the instrument of cleansing the earth after the final confrontation. 3 traditions, Judeo-Christian, Islamic, European mystical. They did not know each other, or if they did, they could not have agreed on the content of their visions. And all 3 say the same thing. The birds will appear when time approaches the edge. Now stop and consider what we have. Ezekiel, 6th century BC, names Persia among Israel's enemies in the last days and describes birds gathering over the field of the final battle. John, 1st century AD, repeats the same picture in Revelation. Islamic Hadith, 7th century AD, describe birds after the last battle. Nostradamus, 16th century, sees a swarm of flying creatures in the night over an eastern conflict. Vanga, 20th century, speaks of birds as a harbinger of catastrophe and the silence of birds as a sign of the threshold. 5 sources, 26 centuries between the first and the last. Different languages, different religions, different methods, astrology, visions, trance, prophetic revelation, divine inspiration, and every one of them about birds, about this land, about this time. And then the sky over Tel Aviv went dark. There are things that can be explained. Each one, individually, can be explained. But when the signs begin arriving one after another, when birds in the sky above a city at war, and foxes at a sacred wall in the days of that war, and 5 prophets from 5 different eras, all saying the same thing, then the mind runs out of comfortable explanations. And only one question remains, the one that is more frightening than all the others. The one people ask themselves at night, when the news is off and the noise has stopped, only silence and their own thoughts. If these are signs, signs of what exactly? What was written in these texts after this point? What happens after the birds have gathered? That, in the next part. Let's talk about what happens next. Not in the news, not in military briefings, in the texts, because the prophets didn't stop at signs. Signs are only the beginning of the conversation, a warning, a knock on the door. The real content of prophecy is what comes after the signs, what the signs are sent to announce in the first place. And this is where it gets genuinely heavy. Ezekiel, chapter 38. We've already talked about it, the list of nations, Persia, the birds. But we didn't read to the end. Let's read to the end. After the coalition led by Gog descends upon Israel, something happens that none of the attackers expected. Not a military victory for either side. Not negotiations. Not exhaustion from war. Something of a completely different order intervenes. And it will come to pass at the same time, when Gog comes against the land of Israel, says the Lord God, that my fury will show in my face. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath I have spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, and the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, all creeping things that creep on the earth, and all men who are on the face of the earth shall shake at my presence. The birds again, they are trembling. The very birds that were just summoned to the feast, now they are terrified, because what is coming is greater than any war, greater than any army. Ezekiel continues, mountains will collapse, cliffs will crumble, rain and hailstones, fire and brimstone. The coalition will not be destroyed by an opposing army. It will be destroyed by what comes from above. Israel in this scenario is not a military victor. Israel is the place where something unfolds that is beyond the boundaries of human warfare. 7 months, says Ezekiel. 7 months, the Israelites will bury the dead of their enemies to cleanse the land. 7 years they will burn the weapons. 7 months of war. Nostradamus, who is being actively cited in connection with the Iranian conflict right now, also spoke of 7 months as the possible duration of a major Middle Eastern confrontation. 2 sources, separated by 2,000 years, name the same period of time. Coincidence? Count for yourself. But let's go further. Because Ezekiel is only one layer. The revelation of John adds details to this picture that make you physically uncomfortable. John saw the same thing, the final battle, birds, fire. But he also saw what precedes that battle. What happens before the birds gather? In this description, try not to recognize our time in it. 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls of wrath. Each one is a separate wave of upheaval crashing over the earth one after another. And among these signs, war, famine, plague, economic collapse, the sky changing color, rivers turning bitter. But there is one image that theologians have been discussing with particular intensity in recent years. Chapter 6 of Revelation, the 4th horseman, his name is Death, and hell follows with him. And they are given power over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. A fourth of the earth. That is nearly 2 billion people by today's standards. This is not a local conflict. This is not a regional war. This is a planetary event. And all of this, according to the text, happens before the birds gather for the great supper, before the finale. This is not the end. This is the prelude to the end. Stop now and think. We live in a world where several wars are being fought simultaneously, where food supply chains have been fractured, strikes on Iranian ports, disruptions to fertilizer supplies, the threat of famine spreading across the poorest regions of the world, where a pandemic killed millions just a few years ago and showed how fragile the entire system truly is. where economies are cracking under the pressure of wars, sanctions, and death. Sword, famine, plague. Are the four horsemen already riding, or not yet? That is a question each person answers for themselves. But the Islamic tradition adds yet another layer to this picture, and it is about geography, about specific places, about exactly where all of this will unfold. The Hadith on Malhama al-Kubra, the Great Battle, name a location, not vaguely on the land of Israel or in the east, specifically a valley in Syria, a place called Dabik, or, in other accounts, Al-Amak, northern Syria. This is not merely geography. This is the place that ISIS used as a symbol in its propaganda years ago, precisely because it is mentioned in Hadith as the location of the final battle. They believe they were fighting for this place. But the Hadiths speak of a very different outcome. Not the victory of any caliphate, the descent of Isa, Jesus in the Islamic tradition, who comes down from heaven and puts an end to the Dajjal, the Antichrist. And only then, come the birds, the enormous birds that carry away the bodies. Three traditions converge on one point. The birds come at the very end, when everything else has already happened, when the last battle has already been fought. The birds are the final full stop, the point after which something fundamentally different begins. And now, pay attention. Now look at all of this together. The ravens over Tel Aviv did not appear after the battle. They appeared before it, in the middle of it, while the war is still going, while the missiles are still flying, while the count of the dead is still open. These are not the final birds of prophecy. These are the forerunners, not the birds summoned to the feast after the victory. These are the birds that arrive first to survey the land, to wait. By every prophetic text, we are not at the end of history right now. We are in its prelude, in the part that theologians call birth pangs, painful, intensifying, unstoppable contractions before something new enters the world. Ezekiel described it as escalation. First the coalition assembles, then it moves, then intervention from above, and only then, birds at the feast. We appear to be somewhere near the beginning of this sequence. The coalition is forming. The strikes are being carried out. Persia is at war with Israel. The birds are circling, but the feast has not yet begun. On one hand, that should bring some relief. Not the end. Not yet. On the other hand, it means the worst is still ahead. That, in the next part. There is a question that has been hanging over this entire conversation from the beginning. A question every reasonable person asks themselves while listening to everything we've discussed. An honest question. A fair one. What if they're just birds? Let's talk about this seriously. Without deflection. Without dismissing the skeptic as someone who simply refuses to see the truth. Because the skeptic is not the enemy. The skeptic is the one who demands evidence. And that demand deserves respect. So, ravens over Tel Aviv. Ornithologists explained it, migration. That's true. Israel really is one of the largest migration corridors on the planet. Birds fly through here every spring and every autumn, regardless of whether a war is happening or not. They flew here in 1967 during the Six-Day War. They flew in 73 during the Yom Kippur War. They're flying now. They don't know about the war. They have no prophetic mission. They're simply flying where they've flown for millions of years. Foxes at the Western Wall. Also explainable. Jerusalem is a city surrounded by hills and wasteland. Foxes have always lived here. They come out at night. They explore their territory. The fact that someone spotted them near the wall is not a sign from heaven. It's urban wildlife that someone filmed on their phone at the right moment. Nostradamus. His quatrains are so vague and open to interpretation that they can be applied to any conflict in any era. This isn't prophecy. It's a Rorschach test. Everyone sees in it what they want to see. Scholars who have studied his text professionally say it plainly. Not a single prediction of Nostradamus was ever used before the event it supposedly foretold. Only after. Only once the event had already occurred did someone pull out the relevant quatrain and say, "Look, he knew." Vanga. Most of her predictions are reconstructions. Notes made after the fact. Interpretations of vague phrases that can be read multiple ways. The Iron Bird's prediction about September 11th. A compelling story, but there is not a single documented source that recorded those words before September 11th, 2001. Only after. All of this is true. Honest, uncomfortable truth that needs to be spoken aloud. And yet there is something that rational explanation does not resolve. Not because it's wrong, but because it answers the wrong question. Rational explanation answers the question of why the birds are here. It does not answer the question of why these birds, in this place, at this time, are described in texts 2,000 years old. Those are different questions. And the second one is harder. Because let's look at what cannot be explained away. Ezekiel, 6th century BC. At that moment, the Persian Empire was the greatest power in the world. Israel as a state did not exist. The people were in Babylonian captivity. The idea that Israel would ever be reborn, that it would become a state again, that Persia would once again be its enemy. From the perspective of any reasonable person in the 6th century BC, this was fantasy. Impossible. Absurd. 2,600 years have passed. Israel exists. Persia, Iran, is at war with it. Right now. Exactly as written in the text. And the crucial detail. The text says that Israel at this moment is living in security, that its people have been gathered from many nations and have returned to their land. A people gathered from the nations, brought back from captivity. This was written about a state that did not exist at the time of writing, about a people scattered across the entire world who returned, about an enemy from the east, named by name. How do you explain that with migration? How do you fit that into the framework of just coincidence? You can say, the prophets were intelligent men, they analyzed politics, they extrapolated trends, they made an educated guess. Perhaps, but to guess with such precision, the country, the direction of the attack, the condition of Israel, across 26 centuries, that is either genius-level analysis, or something else entirely. And here we arrive at the most uncomfortable place in this entire conversation. The question of what to do with this knowledge. Let's say, just suppose, as a thought experiment, that the prophecies are accurate, that everything written in these texts is genuinely unfolding according to the written scenario, that the ravens over Tel Aviv are exactly what they appear to be to the people who watch them from the street below with something cold spreading through their chests, that the foxes at the western wall are exactly the seal the Talmud spoke of. Then what? What does a person do who is living in the era described by the prophets? Historically, people did one of three things. The first, denial. They told themselves, this isn't about us. This isn't now. This will happen sometime in the distant future. It doesn't concern us. This is the most popular option, and the most vulnerable, because this is exactly what people thought in every era the prophets wrote about. The contemporaries of Jeremiah did not believe the temple would be destroyed, right up to the day the Babylonian forces entered the city. The second, panic. They sold everything, retreated to the mountains, waited for the end. History knows dozens of such movements. Every one of them ended the same way. The end did not come on the appointed day. People returned with nothing, disappointed and hollowed out. Because prophecies never give dates. Never. Not a single one ever said, on this exact day, at this exact hour. That was done deliberately. The third, the rarest and the hardest. To look at what is happening with open eyes. To neither close yourself off from reality, nor dissolve into terror. To understand that if the prophecies of destruction are coming true, the prophecies of restoration will come true as well. That after the birds at the feast comes rain that washes the earth clean. That after Malhama al-Kubra in the Islamic tradition comes an era of justice. That Vongus said, this is not the end, this is the beginning. The new world will be better than the old one, for those who are worthy. Rabbi Akiva laughed looking at the fox at the ruins of the Holy of Holies. Not because he wasn't afraid, not because he didn't understand the scale of the catastrophe, but because he understood more than he could see. He saw not just the fox, he saw through the fox, saw the promise sealed inside that image. One prophecy was fulfilled, therefore the second will be fulfilled also. This is not naive optimism. This is a very cold, very clear-eyed view of the logic of prophetic texts. Destruction and restoration are inseparable. Night is not the opposite of dawn. Night is the path to dawn. But between night and dawn, there is darkness. Complete. Impenetrable. The kind of darkness in which people lose their bearings, lose each other, lose themselves. And it is precisely in that darkness, right now, by all appearances, that we find ourselves. The birds are circling. The foxes are walking. Persia is at war with Israel. Swarms of drones, Nostradamus's iron bees, are striking targets in the night. Vonga spoke of a threshold, a point beyond which the world will never be what it was. We don't know how far we are from that point. Maybe years, maybe months, maybe less. But the birds are already here. And here is the most important thing. The reason it was worth having this conversation at such length and in such depth. Here is the meaning of all of it. The prophets did not write their texts to frighten people. They wrote them to warn. The difference is enormous. Fear paralyses. A warning gives time. Ezekiel wrote to a people in captivity, people who had lost everything and could not believe they had a future. John wrote to persecuted Christians of the first century, people who were being killed for their faith and who might not wake up the next morning. The prophet Muhammad spoke of Malhama al-Kubra not to spread panic, but so that those who would live in that time would know. This is not random. This is not chaos. This is not meaningless destruction. There is a logic behind it. There is a design. And perhaps that is the strangest and most consoling thing in this entire story. That we were warned. That this time was known about in advance. That the ravens over Tel Aviv and the foxes at the Western Wall are not random horror. They are pages from a book that was written long ago. And that book has an ending. What that ending is, in the final part. There is one detail we haven't talked about yet. A detail that changes everything. Because the ravens and the foxes are signs in the sky and on the ground. Visible signs. Signs you can film on your phone and post online. But there is a third sign. A quiet one. Almost invisible to those who don't know what to look for. This sign is an animal. Red. And it has already been under the knife. 2022. From a ranch in the state of Texas, 5 red heifers arrived in Israel. Not just any heifers. Red ones, of a special breed, selected with extraordinary care. They were examined for months. Every hair, every spot. Because according to Jewish religious law, the law written in the book of Numbers, chapter 19, a special purification ritual requires a cow without a single hair of any other color. Not one. Completely red. Without blemish. That has never been put under a yoke. In the last 2,000 years, such a cow has been found 9 times. 9 times in 20 centuries. 5 at once. Unprecedented. Why are they needed? The ashes of the red heifer, according to Jewish tradition, are the only substance that can purify people from ritual impurity associated with death. And without this purification, it is impossible to enter the Temple Mount. Impossible to perform services in the temple. Impossible to build the third temple. The third temple. This is where all these signs lead. This is what stands behind the ravens, behind the foxes, behind 5 red heifers from Texas. This is what Ezekiel chapter 38, Revelation chapter 19, and the Hadith on Malhama al-Kubra are actually about. All 3 traditions, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, converge on one point. The final events of history unfold around the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, around the very place where the Al-Aqsa Mosque now stands, the third holiest site in Islam, and where, according to Jewish tradition, the third temple must be built. This is the most explosive point on the planet, not in the military sense, though in that sense too, in the prophetic sense, because 3 religions, 3 billion people, 3 traditions point to one place, and all 3 say that it is here, on these stones, that the finale unfolds. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has already produced all the ritual vessels, the golden menorah, the altar, the priestly garments. More than 500 young men, descendants of the tribe of Levi, have been trained as temple priests. Everything is ready. Everything is waiting, like the props of a performance that is about to begin. Everything except one thing, the ashes of the red heifer. And here the story takes a turn that makes you genuinely cold. July 1st, 2025. It happened quietly, without major headlines, without live broadcasts. A group of people on the West Bank sacrificed a red heifer, one of the 5 Texas animals. A ritual that had not been performed in 2,000 years took place. It seemed that was it. The threshold had been crossed. The era had changed. The purification had begun. But then, the inspection. 2 hairs. 2 black hairs in the red coat. 2. Not 10. Not 100. 2. According to the law of the Torah, according to the Mishnah Tractate Para, 2 black hairs render the sacrifice invalid. Completely. Without exception. The entire ritual canceled. The purification did not occur. The third temple, still impossible. Stop and feel the scale of this moment. 2,000 years of waiting. 5 specially selected animals brought from another continent. Centuries of prayers. Trained priests. Prepared vessels. A golden menorah waiting for its place. And, at the very last moment, 2 black hairs stop everything, as if something will not allow this to happen. Not yet. This is either extraordinary biological bad luck, or something greater. In prophetic texts, there is a concept, the time appointed by God. Not before, not after. Exactly at the moment that is already written, but not revealed to people. The red heifer cannot be sacrificed before its time. It is waiting for its hour, and that hour has not yet come. But it got closer. Because now we know they are ready. The knife is sharp. The priests are trained. The animals are there. All that is missing are 2 things, the right heifer and the right moment. And judging by the relentless momentum of all of this, neither will keep us waiting much longer. Now, look at everything together. Ravens over Tel Aviv, spring of 2026. The war with Iran is ongoing. Foxes at the Western Wall, a few months ago. An attempt to sacrifice the red heifer, summer of 2025. Stopped by 2 hares. 5 red heifers in Israel, waiting. Ezekiel names Persia in the list of Israel's enemies, written in the 6th century BC. Nostradamus sees a swarm of flying creatures in the night over an eastern conflict, written in 1555. Vonga speaks of a threshold beyond which the birds will go silent, said in the 20th century. 7 points. 7, the number that in biblical tradition means completeness, fullness, the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. And all 7 here. And all 7 now. You can close this video. Say migration. Urban foxes. A failed ritual with a flawed cow. Vague quatrains. Apophenia. The human brain finds patterns where there are none. You can. But here is what cannot be denied. The state of Israel exists, though 2,600 years ago this seemed impossible. Persia is once again the enemy of Israel, as written in the text. The Jewish people have returned to their land from the diaspora, exactly as Ezekiel described. An attempt to sacrifice the red heifer has already been made, for the first time in 2,000 years. Something that was written has already come true, precisely, documentably, undeniably, which means the rest may come true as well. And then, the final question, the quietest one, the most personal one. What happens when a heifer is found without a single black hair? When the ritual is completed? When the ashes are mixed with water and the purification takes place? What comes next? According to the texts, according to the prophecies, according to the logic of events described by Ezekiel, John, Muhammad, Nostradamus, Vonga, they all answer the same way. First, darkness, real darkness, complete, the kind in which familiar landmarks disappear. And then, a dawn that no one alive has ever seen. Rabbi Akiva laughed at the ruins of the Holy of Holies, because he saw through the destruction, saw the promise sealed inside the catastrophe. One prophecy was fulfilled, therefore the second will be fulfilled also. The birds are circling over Tel Aviv. The foxes are walking at the Western Wall. The knife has already touched the neck of the red heifer, and stopped because of 2 hairs. The clock is running. The hand is moving. And somewhere in the vault of the Temple Institute, a golden menorah is standing, already finished, already polished, waiting for the day it is carried to where it belongs. They are ready. The birds are already here. 2 hairs remain.